On the wall says 10 o'clock. I'll call this special meeting, workshop actually, to order on Tuesday, August the 15th at 10 a.m. Item number 1 is a code enforcement update, and I have been asked to let our city manager, Mr. McDaniel, kick off and tell us why we are here and what we're going to do in this jam-packed, exciting next hour and a half.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, it is a jam-packed day, and again, I want to thank all of you for your time and your energy today. It'll be a full day, starting with the briefing this morning, and this afternoon we'll have the interviews with the consultants. And so it's also going to be an exciting day to kind of be moving along on that process this afternoon. This morning, though, is about code enforcement, obviously. So this is really in line with what we discussed at your retreat, to have briefings once a month in a workshop setting. So this is our first of these. We didn't get to it last month because we were all in the middle of budget workshops. So now we'll start that routine where every month, and when you're off weeks that you don't have a regular council meeting, we'll be scheduling a briefing. And so we have that laid out in your future agenda listing. Example of some of the other future briefings will be over water and wastewater or reclamation, as well as transportation. And if you have any feedback on some larger subject that y'all want to delve into, then just let me know, and we'll try to slate it for a discussion in one of these workshops. So again, this is the first of several, and we hope it'll be very informative for you. Not asking for any decisions today. It's more of a, I guess, overview of where we are on some issues, and we would like some policy direction just through discussion about some issues that you'll see today. And I suspect that'll be the same kind of thing that we'll run into in the other briefings as well. Again, no decisions, but just some good feedback about, is this a good idea, is this not a good idea, and good questions about, well, what are we doing and what are our options? So with that, Mayor, I'm going to turn over to Sabina, who's going to kick off the presentation, and she has several staff members that she wants to introduce along the way. So Sabina.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. First of all, I do have a question about the PowerPoint, and we're not going to be going forward with just talk of this on the screen?
We're going to go with that. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I just wanted to be sure
I
didn't need to advance.
Would it be helpful to get on the same side of the table so we can all see the screens?
No, ma'am. I just wanted to be sure that we were talking off of the sheet.
Yeah, it's the same thing that's in front of you, the hard copy.
Can everybody hear her?
Okay. You might speak a little
It's
louder.
just very difficult to read.
Oh, I see.
I had to get a magnifying glass at home. Maybe my eyes are just old.
Yeah, well, let's put you on, right over
great.
here would be great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sabina, if you want to move your chair down and then just come over here.
Oh, perfect. Just move people, not chairs.
This will also advance it.
Yeah.
How did you get that?
I did the same thing she did to train last night.
Did you?
Yeah.
I thought I was just so
No.
old. I couldn't see anymore.
No, we're all old enough to have that problem.
There we go. Sorry about that.
We are.
Little less informal this way, but this will help me advance the slides. Well, as you have seen, I've only been here for about a month and a half. From the very beginning, though, I have really been impressed with this section of the city, with the code enforcement team. What I'd like to do this morning is basically bring you up to speed, and it really won't be me, it'll be the code enforcement staff that will really get into some of these details. But so what we're doing this morning is bringing you up to speed on the fiscal year 17 to date, and then some options that we will be looking at in the near future. As Mark stated, we're not really looking at any specific policy direction, but any discussion would certainly be welcome. And as you'll see, we have already started on some incremental policy changes. So policy discussions, some ordinance, I'll touch on some ordinances. We will touch on some ordinances and standards that we believe will help us as tools as we move into the future. Again, we'll just touch on those, and you'll hear about those in the coming fiscal year. Some budgetary impacts that we do have $6,000 that was approved. We have not spent really much of that. We did request $25,000 extra, and we'll go into why we did that. So first, we'll cover the first bullet point. So our team, from whom you will, who you see here, and from whom you will hear a little bit later, on the right is Donna. She is the one who's out in the field, and she is the one who does all of the background paperwork to keep us moving, and she's the one who works full-time in code enforcement. Trina, she's the one who takes, if need be, our cases to court, and she also oversees code enforcement. And then we have Danny. Whenever we have a critical situation, he becomes involved, and certainly I hear about those too, and so does the city manager. From the very beginning, when I got here, I think it was on day one that I was told what the huge success rate really is of our code enforcement team, and that is due for two reasons, really. We have the right approach, I believe, on our code enforcement team on the city part, but really and truly it's also the property owners and the citizens that are helping us to clean up the community, to keep it from going into decline. These are the types of cases that we enter. We have a system on the computer that we enter all of our cases, and these are the types of cases that we enter into the system. You will see the three largest. We'll give you some example of the three largest in just a minute here. That shows what you'll see in a minute here will be before and after pictures of the three largest categories here. Those being, and my eyes are the same, so I have to go like so. Those being high weeds and grass. Of course, I can't read these. Sign violations. You will see why, because they're actually, it's pretty easy to have sign violations when you have requirements that regulate snipe signs and temporary signs, things of that nature. And then trash and rubbish, and we will show you a few repeat offenders and how we deal with those today. What I'd like to do at this point with the before and after signs of the sign violations is of those three largest categories, is have Trina come up and talk to you about what you're looking at in these slides.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. On our first slide is snipe signs that were placed, and those are prohibited within our sign ordinance.
What kind?
Snipe signs.
Snipe.
Define it, please.
They are the ones that are in the ground, or also removable signs.
A lot of times what you'll see, like with an open house or an estate sale or house for sale that's not on the property for which it's being sold, it'll be out on the right-of-way somewhere directing traffic, just kind of a temporary sign that somebody's stuck out there.
Yeah.
And so in the industry, they call those snipe signs.
What's wrong with those?
They're prohibited per the sign ordinance.
They're currently not allowable.
In the rights of way is what you're talking about, or
Right.
in unauthorized
On their own
locations.
property, it's,
On your own property
Sure.
is fine.
okay.
On your own property as well.
Right.
You can't put
So you're talking like campaign signs, those kind of old,
No, not
No.
campaign.
Election signs are exempt.
I know, but there's those kind of signs.
Yes.
the ones
But
that
it's
just
that kind of
stick in the
sign.
ground.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Or on corners, if they have a direction to an estate
Right.
sale or all
Right.
that. Garage sale up the street, those are illegal.
These are banner signs according to our ordinance. They are exempt, however, you can only have one per establishment, not exceed 80 square feet, and securely attached to a covering or portion of a building or other permanent structure, such as a wall.
Would you say that slowly again? Only one per building.
One per establishment, not to exceed 80 square feet, and securely attached to a covering, a portion of a building, or other permanent structure, such as a wall.
Is there a reason there's only one per establishment that we know of?
That is according to our sign
Yeah.
ordinance.
And that is
Just
pretty
policy.
typical. And that is pretty typical of other signed ordinances that you see in other cities. The one that Trina was just talking about, which are temporary signs that are real easy to stick in the ground, which you tend to see. I'll give you an example. Houston, for example, if you drive through Houston, you see a lot, they don't have regulations against those temporary signs, and what you tend to see is real proliferation of those types of signs on corners and really throughout on an entire roadway. In cities, and I'll tell you that in cities where there are ordinances that limit those types of signs, it is pretty, on the code enforcement team, they do tend to spend a lot of time either removing those signs or trying to figure out who owns them to get them to remove them.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, we're talking like garage sale signs, right? So is our current policy to let them kind of look the other way while they're having the garage sale and just make sure they pick them up after, or are we going and taking them all down? What are we currently doing?
We are currently, if they're out and we see them as we're driving, then we're removing them and we're talking to them, letting them know what our ordinance
So
is.
if they're there by permission, it's fine, correct?
The only way
If they're
they're,
in someone's yard by permission?
they are not. They can only, the way the ordinance reads is it can only be on your property that is at the garage sale.
What happens is, we only have one code enforcement officer, and on weekends, they're not working, usually. And so, in the past, we've had just enforcement by complaint. So, we just don't have enough resources to do, really aggressive code enforcement. I don't really know that we want to, but that's one policy decision that we'd love some feedback on from the council as we move forward, and especially as we head into the comprehensive planning effort, because these issues will come up in the comprehensive planning effort.
And this seems very restrictive to me. Is there, what would be the next step?
Amend
Just
your
talking about
ordinance.
policy. If we said, you can put up a garage sale sign at the corner from your house on the next main street
As
for
long as you-
24 hours, for
You get
48
permission
hours.
from the owner.
With permission of the owner. Not on the right of way, but where, I guess the idea of staying on the right of way is to prevent traffic from being distracted. But up in somebody's yard.
The way that I have handled those types of different policy direction, or even if it came up as part of staff, if we're having just not quite realizing why the ordinance is worded the way that it is, what we've done before is had a policy discussion with our decision makers, and before we have to go through a formal amendment process to make it real clear in the ordinance, to have that legislative action, that we've just had a very public discussion that for the time being we will not enforce until such time that that we have the formal process to go through the Planning and Zoning Commission and then on up to you to have that formal ordinance.
What have you known in other cities that's an ordinance that's a little more permissive than this one, but doesn't lead to a total mess like Houston?
I'm sure that we can find a middle ground.
Well, it runs the full gamut, but I have seen in other cities where they do exactly what you described earlier. If you get permission from the property owner down the street, then that's fine. It's hard to, force a lot of times if you're doing the code enforcement. You got to knock on doors and say, "Did you get permission?" And or did somebody ask you? But it's all about level of enforcement and what y'all want to allow. And garage sale signs have always been, or estate sale signs have always been one of those things where, as long as people are not having more than 2 or 3 a year,
Right.
and not every month kind of thing.
And they're picking them up after.
Yeah,
So it doesn't make the street look tacky.
yeah.
Right, this is, we're talking about one specific thing. Generally speaking, from everything, probably all of us here, the sign ordinance needs to be reviewed. And whether this is one that gets modified or not, this piece of it, there's a lot of aspects to the whole sign ordinance that ought to be looked at. I don't know exactly how we go about doing that, but that would be.
Well, I think it's actually on your future agenda listing is one of the items that we're gonna be looking at. And then, of course, as we look at, in the comprehensive plan
Yeah.
effort, we'll definitely be looking at that issue. Because we'll have to be rewrite portions of the code that support the new direction of the comprehensive plan.
Right,
Let me
which, I'm sorry, at the very latest, we'll be looking at during the implementation phase of the comprehensive plan. But if there are interim steps that we need to take that we can get some low-hanging fruit, if you will, before we go through the 9-month process for the comprehensive plan and then the implementation process. As I said, and even if there is policy direction that is not totally in line with what we have on the books right now, we can work on what's on the books while we, if there is clear consensus in the direction that you would like us to
I think
go.
Mr. Hayes had a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. 2 comments. One, when the sign code was completely redone, what, Trina, 4 or 5 years ago?
2012.
2012. It was a committee made up of chamber members and sign vendors, and probably had 15 people on it, and it probably took us 6 or 9 months of committee meetings, and so just keep that in mind. The other thing is,
And everybody liked this. This was consensus.
this was consensus, and by the time we adopted it, Trina, help me if I misstate this, I think it adopted with very little comment once it got to council as an ordinance. So that's the first comment I'll have. Not that, you all can't relook at it and ask for a full-scale review again. The second thing is, and this may even have been when Trina was here, so council at some point years ago perceived there to be a problem with snipe signs, garage sale signs, and so they directed the city manager to utilize code enforcement half-day on Saturdays. And that really, for a period of time, I don't know if that was a year, but that really kind of addressed that issue, and people understood if I put a garage sale sign down on the corner of Junction Highway and Methodist Academy, it's going to be taken out. It's not worth me putting it down there. So, again, different council, different ways of looking at issues, but that's been in our past as well.
And I think that's probably something that could be addressed, as you said, by report, and then you can send the letter. I have a couple of questions. Number one, we only have one code enforcement, but I remember when we went through our budget process in 15, we were looking at adding one. So Trina, do you not do
I'm still
that?
doing code
Okay,
enforcement
so
as
we
well.
actually have 2
Yes.
that are acting in code enforcement. 'Cause
But
that was
I'm
one of the-
also in office as well
Yes.
doing, right.
Okay. And I've noticed, this is my second question, I would like to know when we do the sign ordinance review, if we get there, I'm kind of curious to know how many variations, how many exceptions to the rule when we grant variances is what I'm trying to say. How many variances may have been granted since 2012, because I'm noticing that there are some establishments that seem to have very large, very tall signs that I know didn't seem to be fitting the bill in the ordinance. So I'd kind of like to know, and this, I'm not saying tomorrow or next week, but at some point in time when we review this, it'd be curious for me to know how many exceptions we've made to the rules.
Be good information.
Okay.
This is another banner that they placed, and we'd had voluntary compliance. These are what's called window signs. You are only, they're exempt signs, however, there are also lighted signs, which you can only have one lighted window or door sign per establishment.
That's getting a little too picky for me.
Not exceed 3 square feet in area, must not blink or move, and must be turned off when closed.
Does that include an open and closed sign? You can
That-
only have that or another?
Right.
And how big?
3 square feet.
Just to let you know, we do have a sign variance request that is in process right now for the Popo's Restaurant across the street. So we will also, as a part of the comprehensive plan, be looking at maybe a little bit different sign regulation for the historic city, where there have been requests. The YO Ranch is an example of signs that are historic, that have historic significance here or elsewhere and would enhance an area. So those are all discussions that we will be having through the comprehensive planning process.
These are feathered flags. You have to get a permit for them. There's no fee to get a permit. Limited to 5 per establishment. May not be displayed more than 20 days within any calendar year. Needs a permit, will not be issued for less than 5 days.
What's the purpose of a permit for that? If it's not a fee, what's the purpose?
I'm assuming to regulate them of how long they can be up.
And it's 5 to 20 days or 30 days?
Less than 5 days.
Less than 5 days.
And that provision is similar to what we just talked about with the snipe signs. If you don't have regulation of some type, then what you do tend to see in other communities is a proliferation of them. These are limited to on premises, but if we did not regulate them in some form or fashion, then eventually what you'll see is a lot of them.
Was this put up as permanent, to be permanent?
No, generally they're there for a few days and then they're removed. However,
That was a special event that we're holding?
right.
I can't read what the sign
It says barbecue. It's just,
No, I can't read what the small signs, I don't see the establishment. That's why I asked if it was meant to be permanent or temporary. If it was for an event.
Dickie's barbecue opening, I think.
It was an opening?
I think so.
Okay.
When you say 20 days, is that consecutive days or just 20 days total? Total.
total.
And let me ask you this, for policy purposes, is this something that code enforcement sends or distributes regularly or annually, or updates through the chamber to the businesses? In other words, they have such a network of owners there at their email disposal, and it seems to me like it's so much easier to do things before than after, so I like to go in before and let everybody know what they're up against rather than come in harshly afterwards, or either way. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to present somehow to the business owners that, for instance, things like this they didn't know about?
Yeah, so it's all about education. And
Exactly.
Most people, they're not interested in violating the regulation
That's
as
right.
long as they know about it.
That's
So
right.
I think that Walt at the chamber would be more than happy to work with us on that, maybe his government affairs committee.
Okay.
So I'll reach out to him to see if they have an interest in us presenting at that committee.
Okay.
And then they have, newsletters that they put out as well.
Exactly.
And all of the ones that Trina's showing you here as an example, I don't believe that any of them realized that they were violating the
No.
sign code. And
Right.
and all of them was being approached.
Sure.
And as you've seen, they have removed them voluntarily
And our
assuming
pro-
without much protest.
Right, and our approach is that we let them know and make them aware of what our sign ordinance is currently before we issue a notice or a citation or anything like that.
Again, Mr. McDaniel, when you do that with Walt, when you have that reach out, and I think that'd be a good first resource there, you might get their feedback from business owners. Maybe they can help us with things that they feel are unreasonable, or maybe things we need to do more restrictive as a business community. Does that make sense?
Right.
For their
and-
suggestions.
Right, and again, getting back to the comprehensive plan,
Yeah.
we'll be looking at all that, and the chamber's gonna be very engaged in that process, so.
Okay. Make signs a part of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
This next slide is trash and debris, where they had on their porch, and we've gotten voluntary compliance. We leave a notice if someone's not there. We give them up to 7 to 10 days to remove it, and then we go back out to reinspect.
So could you cite the code briefly? Because I have a lot of these complaints, and quite honestly, I didn't know that we had an ordinance restricting debris on a front porch. Could you cite the code somehow, briefly?
We have a couple couple of different areas in the code that allow us to address this. One is trash and debris on property, as well as sanitary maintenance of property.
We'll send you the excerpt from the code, Mayor.
Okay, because I sent an address along that had issues, and the neighbor says nothing is done. That they were supposed to fence that area, and so they laid some fencing against it. It
Okay.
wasn't permanent fencing, so,
If you'll follow up, send me an email on
Okay.
the complaint, I'll look into it.
okay, and I appreciate the wording in that
We'll send it out to
particular-
all of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
What happens after the 7 to 10 days?
Generally,
If nothing's done?
if nothing's done, then we would have to write a citation to them.
As she mentioned earlier, what we're seeing here, and you saw on that very first slide, is, you know, most all of our violations are voluntarily addressed. And so you're gonna see in a little while some exceptions, and I wanted to, you know, say that now, that we don't really have rampant problems with, you know, multiple people. It's usually just a handful where we have some issues, and there's some extenuating circumstances. And you'll see also where a lot of it has to do with just the cost for the cleanup, and they just don't have the means to do that. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we get to that portion of the presentation. But again, most all the violations are dealt with on a voluntary basis. Once they're aware of the code, these guys are just, you know, I call them compassionate code enforcement officers, because that's the first order of business, and rarely do we get into a citation situation.
Good.
This is a picture of, sometimes we face where it's bulk pickup and either they haven't, they missed the date of bulk pickup, and they have this out here, so they have to get rid of it of themselves, or we also tell them there's a certain amount of time where there's a voucher that is available, but during the bulk pickup, they have to set it out. And it's twice per year, and it's not to be placed more than 10 days prior to the start date of the bulk pickup.
The voucher is for, they take their own, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But it means they won't have to pay.
Right.
What are you guys currently doing if it's like an elderly couple that has no way to get to somewhere? So how do we handle those?
Sometimes we reach out to the Christian Men's Job Corps to see if they can help them in any way.
That is something too that we'll be talking with you some more about. The additional funding that we requested in for this budget year would help us to go ahead and pay for some remediation, and then right now our tool to use is placing a lien on the property. But there are other things that we would like to, in the future, discuss with you for repayment, perhaps on a water bill. An example, we do that right now with sewer, with some sewer violations where they just take the cap off and allow. Basically, right now we have that tool, but it's only for sewer violations. So for discharge. But we would like to expand that or talk about exploring getting into water bill reimbursement, payment plan, those types of things.
Now, we talked about, Mr. McDaniel and I talked about, it was suggested from the community that maybe our streets department, you know, could have a truck or something like that, and they could come through on a regular basis. But he said he's dealt with that in other communities, and it can become an on-call type situation that puts an undue pressure on staff, on city staff. So I like the idea of the Christian Men's Job Corps and maybe the Diedert Center and other organizations, yes, that might be willing to be helpful in that, other than what things we could do. But anyway, we have talked about that.
Right. The other thing that happens, if you have it more than just a couple of times a year, what you end up with is trash on the street year-round.
Right.
And people miss it, and they think, well, just next month they'll pick it up, and so it just sits there, and your community has just got junk all over it. So.
This picture is of yard waste. They exceeded the amount they were going to pick up. What our ordinance reads is it needs to be neatly stacked, perpendicular, larger branches facing curb, not to exceed 6 feet in length and diameter, and brush cannot exceed 24 cubic or 2 cubic yard limit, equivalent to small pickup bed filled 4 feet high from bed of truck, and it cannot be placed more than 10 days to where a nuisance is created.
So this picture is where you got voluntary compliance as well?
Yes.
All of the pictures thus far is where we've got.
All of them have been voluntary compliance. This is another trash and debris of things they just kind of had stored out on their front porch that they voluntarily complied with.
Are these all by citizen complaint?
Yes.
Okay.
This is a high grass and weeds. Our ordinance reads 12 inches or higher is a violation. This was voluntarily, they mowed. This is another high grass and weeds. And this is another slide of high grass and weeds.
So it's the same for unimproved properties as improved properties?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And that one was just awful. I'm so glad they finally mowed that. That's inviting. I could recognize that place because I used to walk by it and those thistles would be up to your head.
Trina, is there an exception for land over a certain size in terms of the tract? So if it's over 5 acres or whatever?
If it's a wooded area to where it's hard to be mowed, there is an exception in that to where it doesn't have to be maintained.
There's also an agricultural exemption where we have properties that back up to, for instance, River Hills. You have ranches that back up to those, and we'll end up with large thistles and high grass back there. But that's got an agricultural exemption, and they're not required to mow those.
Who defines the wooded area? Is that y'all that goes out and says, oh, you can't, I understand you can't mow here because it's difficult?
Well, I think they probably look first at the ag exemption
Right.
status. This would be the main thing, wouldn't it?
It's a
Correct.
judgment call on the part of the officer.
And
Okay.
Mr. Hayes has a comment.
So, and this is another ordinance that we haven't looked at in years and years and years and years since I've been here. And you all probably know this. So xeriscaping in tall grasses. So cities have built exceptions in for those. And some people are, you know, if they've xeriscaped their front yard and they're using fountain grass, well, that grass is going to be over 12 inches. So you all might want to consider looking at that as part of kind of a code enforcement review in the future.
Yeah, because that property that sits on Jackson Road, it's got like 8 or 9 acre, whatever the heck it is, that it butts up on Jackson between Methodist Encampment and Harper. They get hassled, I guess, about tall grass, but their grass doesn't look like raw land like this. It actually looks like prairie grass or something, and it actually looks good. And their house is set way back. It seems like there'd be a way to make that one be in compliance because it doesn't look bad.
We got
but-
cited several years ago for tall grass, and that was our scheme. You know,
Yeah,
the
right.
first part is gravel, and then
Right.
the second part is just natural.
Right.
And then the very top has a mowed lawn.
Right.
And some neighbor, because I asked the guy
Right.
that brought the citation, or that came to talk to me, he didn't really cite me, I said, so somebody in the neighborhood's complained? He said, yeah, I guess so. So we cut
Yeah.
it, we keep it cut now.
Bail it?
You cut it more often than that. You can.
Thank you, Trina. Well, and we will be talking, actually, in fairly recent past, up until the fairly recent past, we operated on a complaint basis only. It's been just the past few months where we have become a little more proactive, and I'll talk a little bit.
Why are we becoming more proactive?
Can we,
Beautification
Can we wait for
complaints.
that?
yeah, we're gonna go into that into
Okay.
some detail. If that's okay with you, can we hold that
Yeah.
question? Okay, thank you.
And now I'll be getting into some areas where we have not had, and they are few, and you'll see that the case type, we don't have a whole lot of them, but they do threaten their immediate area as far as potential decline. And, and those are some areas that would probably spark the most discussion about policy, about some tools that we might be asking for in the future. And Danny's going to come up and talk about some of these.
Pictures that you're looking at there is a home that had a tremendous amount of fuel in the backyard around the home and surrounding the home. Home itself caught fire and is beyond repair. So they have been working on cleaning out all the metal, the junk car, and all the metal parts are now gone from that property. And as you see, that's kind of an after. We still have some pallets and other debris that need to be removed. The resources of the elderly couple are limited on this property. Have spoken with them about voluntary demolition, so that we can get the property taken care of. That would be something we would do with the budget that we're requesting more money in. But we met with them one and basically they agreed, that they would go for voluntary demolition on that property. One of the things that we've kind of been talking about when you look at code enforcement, and some people's idea of code enforcement is that we're out to harass the community, and that is certainly not the way that this department operates. We go out, we speak with the homeowners or whoever there's a complaint is against a property owner, and we do our best to be respectful to everyone, no matter their station. We make them a part of the solution instead of the problem. And we go in and our normal approach is to, well, we have a complaint that's been filed. How can we work together to get this resolved? And that's how we approach most of our code enforcement issues. Now, we get into situations from time to time where that doesn't work and we end up in court, but very rarely. Like I said, we only have 6 current court cases. And so, that's our attitude, is to help get the problem resolved, to be a partner with the homeowner to get it resolved. And that's the way we work.
Danny, along those lines, could you talk a little bit about the right to privacy and that fine line that we walk there?
When you look at anybody's home, every citizen is protected by their Fourth Amendment constitutional rights. What we look at from code enforcement is what is visible from public view. I can't go to your property and stick my camera over the fence to take a picture of violations in your backyard, even if your neighbor's complaining about violations in your backyard. I can't do that. I can if the neighbor has a 2-story home and wants to give me access to be able to confirm that we have an issue. I can do that. But I cannot go into the backyard of anyone's home, unless we suspect that there's a health hazard or a huge fire load that might be endangering the neighbors. And at that point, before I can go into that backyard, I would first ask permission to go with the owner. If they wouldn't let me, I would have to go through the steps of getting an administrative warrant to be able to go in there. To date, we've never had to do that. Most people are willing to allow you to go look, at a complaint, but we are not allowed to go past the public right of way.
Okay, but with something like that, and you have, if it's a public safety thing, like they've got, gasoline cans all over the place or something like that I understand. But if it's a code that you're gonna enforce that's really about aesthetics, are you gonna enforce that if it's only visible from the second story of the next door neighbor?
It would have to be, if it were aesthetics, I wouldn't bother with it, but if it were something that we had a tremendous amount of debris that would be a harboring place of rats and snakes or whatever, something like that, we would get involved if we were given access to be able to confirm that issue. We're not out there to, make people clean up the backyard because they've got, a couple of gas cans and a barbecue pit and maybe a lawnmower. That's not our function.
Well, and that's another fine line that we walk to. You'll notice actually the violations that we're talking about have a definition, and yes, there is a judgment call on some of them, but for the most part, we're not enforcing taste. We're not enforcing aesthetics. What code enforcement is really focused on is dilapidated structures and really dangerous situations.
Public health and safety.
That's right.
Along
And
those
that's the
lines,
first focus.
I'm sorry, Sabina, but along those lines, I've had difficulty with this personally and have had not really too much satisfaction in getting it resolved, but I've had a number of questions about when it becomes a health hazard. And if there is a state definition, or if we have a definition, you say no, you're shaking your head.
I wouldn't say there's a definition, but like, for instance, when Danny or code enforcement comes to me, and aesthetics is one thing, and I'll echo what Sabina said, we're not enforcing taste, or we're not enforcing to our standards. I mean, there's standards that we have for our homes and our backyards that we don't necessarily impose on others. But if it's health and safety, then we'll talk about, okay, what is health and safety? Well, they've got enough stuff in their backyard that the neighbor has seen, a rat, or it's causing mosquitoes for
Right.
different times of year. That's where we'll go in and, if they don't allow us access, we'll go get a search warrant, and I'll guarantee you that our judges, and we start with the district court judges, at least in my practice, and they'll make us define that for them, because they want to be sure that they're really allowing someone to go in for a justifiable
Sure.
reason.
Well, that's what I've observed, mattresses and tents that, laying around there. They're definitely more than just harboring mosquitoes, but something that a child or anything, there's certainly varmints that could be harbored in there. So I'm interested to know, that's not a state definition, but that would be our interpretation as a health hazard.
Right.
Okay.
And if I can confirm those, if I can get either access to where I can see those violations voluntarily, or if I can get the neighbor to somehow provide me access where I can see them without peeking through the fence or climbing over the fence to look at it, then we can take action on it. If it is a situation where we've seen maybe the neighbors taking pictures or whatever, and we can see that it looks like a huge fire load and or health issue,
Right.
then at that point, if they won't give me voluntary access, then I would need to get a search warrant to be able to go in, or an administrative warrant to go in and look at it, and then take the appropriate actions. If I can't get compliance, and we work with folks, it's not clean it up today, you've got 10 days. A lot of times these problems that we run into are going to take much longer than 10 days. What that requires from our department is continual follow-up to go in and have it, show progress that you're making on it. If we get into a situation where we can't get any progress out of it, that's when we end up in court, and at that point they're facing a fine. Court doesn't necessarily instruct them to clean it up, but they fine, and we go back at that point again and still try to gain compliance. If we can't get it, we're back in court again. But that's kind of how they work with that.
That's a good plan. What I'd like to see, again, policy-wise, I think we've done it in the past. Maybe EA, since you were here, I'm not sure, but some very simple public education article. I know you do weekly or monthly things in the paper, but if we could put together something for public education so that they know these things. I mean, I get calls all the time about cars parked in the yards and trash on the front porch and mattresses out in the backyard. And so I think we could concisely and simply put together something for public education that might keep us from having to even go those few cases where we have to prosecute. I think that would be helpful for you guys.
Right.
Yeah.
It would. And again, as long as we get the complaint filed in on a complaint basis reaction, then we go out and we'll take care of those issues and make sure they're taken care of. The proactive, the question was asked, when did you go proactive? Again, we didn't go proactive in a manner that we were out looking for every small violation. Don Davis directed us to go proactive somewhat, and what that meant to me was we started in an area of town, and we kind of blocked out where we're going to go all the way around the city, not just one neighborhood, and look for gross violations of things that are just eyesores and problems for people, especially in the gateway districts and things like that. But, it wasn't a let's go out and see how many we can find. It was let's canvass the neighborhoods, look for gross violations that, are happening, and talk to the folks about getting those cleaned up.
And that makes it so much more rational to the person who got called.
Correct.
If he or she knows that we're looking all over town, we're gonna have a consistent attitude.
Right.
Because the
the downside of being complaint-driven is that somebody has to clean up who says, but look.
And they do, and we respond to those as well, so.
You know, Danny, you might look at something like in cooperation with the media and make it each month or each quarter, we're gonna concentrate on yard waste, or we're gonna concentrate on sanitation issues, you know, and then it's a big public awareness campaign. And you could do it by category and maybe by quarter, and then the public would be on board. And it would be on everybody's mind that, hey, not just code enforcement knows, but the community now knows that this is the area we're gonna clean up on this quarter.
Okay.
There was some impressive thing in that Texas Municipal League magazine last time. Some town had done that, and they marveled at how citizens had taken it on ownership.
Good.
And we're just not gonna have a messy looking town.
I understand. If I can get it to change. Oh, it's not wanting to change.
Pushing on the right.
Yeah.
Supposed to erase the seal.
Hmm?
When it's pointed at the seal,
At the seal over there?
yes.
You gotta stand on just one foot.
Charlie.
See what's wrong? Maybe it's me?
Are your hands sweaty, Dan?
No.
He's working on it.
Oh, he's working on it, yeah.
Okay.
Froze up.
He's frozen, yeah.
Slide.
Stayed too long.
He has too many questions.
You want me to move through them? Okay.
Well, while that's happening, just to get back to the definitions question, those are some of the tools that we will be walking through with you in the future. It's always been amazing to me how, if I look at a piece of property and I think there are violations out there, it doesn't meet some of the higher level of
Legal.
definition, if you will.
Legal definition.
Right. So we will be looking at those also to get us some additional tools potentially. And again, with the right attitude, not necessarily to have to use them all the time, but to have those at our disposal should we need them, and that's what we're getting ready to get into here in a minute.
You know, it could start with us too. I mean, it's good to have us educated to know an overall idea, concept of what we're looking to achieve.
I got rid of my brush pile.
There you go.
Once I found out that you cannot have them even on your own property.
Right, but you can't have a mulch pile either.
Well, you can't even have a mulch pile?
According to the
Uh-oh, I'm
solid waste
still
ordinance that we
impiling.
just passed, that's yard waste that you're
There we
putting
go.
out there.
That's it.
That's not allowed by our
But
solid
that's-
waste ordinance that we just passed. No, you can't
But
have yard
surely
waste
there's
on
a
your yard.
difference between shredded up branches and branches.
Well, not according to the ordinance. Now,
Whoops.
you're right. And
Like
I,
leaves?
Well,
Huh?
You can't mulch leaves?
well, it's yard waste when you put it in the pile,
What about the,
so you can't leave it there.
community garden? They have a bunch of that.
Oh, we'll have to shut it down. We'll get to that later though.
Somebody's gonna have to complain.
Yeah, let's not be proactive.
The next slide you'll see is one of what we would consider a dilapidated home, substandard structure. House has been there for quite some time. I'm sure most of you may even know where it is. It had been on a tear down schedule at one time and was removed from I guess, Building Board of Adjustments removed it because the owner of the property had stated he had it sold and multiple excuses from time to time. We've spoken to this individual for quite some time. We don't have the budget to tear that one down at this point, but that's one of the ones that we're targeting, looking at tearing down. The foundation is completely collapsed on it. The roof has caved in. It is boarded up and padlocked to try to keep vagrants from getting into the property, but from time to time we'll go there and look at it and find some of that torn off, and people have made access to it. So that is one that I believe should be on our tear down list to try to get it taken care of. This home's kind of a little bit unique. The foundation's completely collapsed on this home. As you walk through the home, you find a difference in elevation between the bedroom, master bedroom, and the living area of about 8 inches. And they've taken and put great stuff insulation in there to try to seal that off. It was a little different with this home. It's been there from the first day I came here 8 years ago. I was shocked that the house was still standing when I drove into town. And we had an issue with it where Hill Country Home Opportunity Council had agreed to tear down the home and build her a new home. And so I wrote a letter to help them, to assist them with that, basically stating that the home was not able to be repaired. It would be too cost ineffective to do so. It was not a safe structure, and that it needed to be torn down. So she moved out of the home. We pulled the electric meters out of the house, and then something happened with Hill Country Home Opportunity Council where they didn't follow through on their end. So she basically was made homeless from that incident. So my understanding is I've heard that she's found another organization that is willing to tear it down. So we'll see. If they're not willing to tear it down, that is one that needs to come down as well. It did not have plumbing facilities when we went over there and found her living in the home. You can see pictures where the toilet used to be and a wet area around that sewer line where they were pouring things down the drain. So we lovingly asked her to move and to not occupy the house, you know, that it was a health hazard and she could not be there. So as far as I know, she's not living there. We go by from time to time and she's not there. Her still has water onto the property to water her plants and things like that, but as far as I know, she's not occupying the property. It is a hazard and it needs to be torn down. So that's another one that is on our list to try to take care of.
You know what I would think, just my opinion is, you mentioned the gateway corridors and, you know, those areas that are highly visible. I'd start there, you know, on structures with our budget. You know, does that make sense?
Yes.
Some of these maybe that are a fire hazard, I assume that the electricity gets turned off. Do you have the right to do that, or?
If we determine that there's, again, we don't have access to the inside of people's homes, from time to time you'll hear someone complain about a home that they either think they know or that they've seen that has electrical problems inside the house and it's just an unsafe structure and that we should go over there and pull the power. Well, we don't have the right to go, you know, breaking in people's doors and looking to see if it's a safe structure. If we end up in let's say it's a police operation where they've gained access to a home and they've discovered an issue that is severe, then there's the possibility of us being able to get involved in that. And if we find it unsafe, then we can pull the power on that house, you know, or try to work with them to get it repaired to where it's livable.
I was on the Habitat Board for about 6 years and did a lot of home visits for people that were applying for Habitat homes, and was sometimes shocked at situations they were living with and paying rent.
Correct.
Sizable rent.
Correct.
To somebody. I turned in one or two. I'm hearing you say you couldn't do anything about it.
Well, hearsay is what it would be for me. And so if you come in, if someone tells me they've seen something and it's just an individual, to me that's more hearsay. I can't just go knock on the door and say, give me access to your home so that I can confirm what so-and-so is saying. If a renter has possession of the property, what we'll typically get calls from on that is when a renter calls code enforcement and says, you know, I've been living in this and I've been paying rent on this and I'm being evicted, or, you know, I'm not paying my rent. It's unsafe to live here. And we tell them, we'll be glad to come out and take a look. You understand that the risk involved in that is that if I come and I find that it's truly an unsafe structure, at that point I'm going to ask you to leave the structure immediately and I'm going to terminate all the services to the house. Well, then they don't want us to come in because then they'd be in the street.
They'd be homeless.
And we've had this conversation in the past. This is one of the things we want to tackle in the comprehensive plan. Is one of the committee topics is renters' properties, rental properties. And it's a touchy situation. Danny and I have talked about it because your solution is eviction, and that doesn't solve the problem for the renter. So, but I know there are some cities, I know there is some legislation you can look at, and when we do our neighborhood discussion in the comprehensive plan, committee-wise, I've got a whole file that I want to turn over that are laws pertaining to safe rental properties.
Yeah, this would be a good time also to mention to the whole council that, of course, you have your interviews this afternoon, but as we move through the comprehensive plan process, you're all going to be interviewed from the consultants about things that you see that you want to be addressed in the comprehensive plan. And so it'd be nice for you all to be, just to share a list with them about some of the things that you have on your mind, whether it has to do with neighborhoods or transportation or economic development, water, whatever the issue is as from a policy perspective, so that they can understand that we might want to go in that direction, or it doesn't get lost in the process.
Yeah, Mr. Hayes?
Two things. I forget if Sabina or Danny brought this up. So sometimes it's not just a neighbor turning in a neighbor. We get the complaints from the police department. They've gone in for some law enforcement reason, and they'll say, hey, Danny, you need to take a look at this property. The conditions inside are awful, and so that'll get us in. Or it's CPS, something along those lines. So I wanted to reiterate that. Also health and safety. So usually health and safety can also be they can't get, or the utilities have been disconnected, and usually that's part and parcel with a dilapidated structure or some very junky structure. But it could be our home. I mean, it could be a nice home that for whatever reason their water and electricity has been turned off. You can't inhabit that. That's health and safety as well. So I just wanted that's kind of the exception to the general rule, but that occurs on rare occasions where someone moves in and they can't get electricity for whatever reason, maybe bad debt or whatever. Well, they can't live in it.
Correct.
And not to get too much into your policy discussion on that yet, but I have worked in cities where we had a full-blown rental inspection program, and then in one where it was just getting started and we were phasing it in. So I have some thoughts along those lines
Okay. Good.
that I'll want to share in the future.
Good.
And I agree with that. I think that's a good idea to have because, like you say, a lot of those folks that I've been in those homes are paying, usually it's a couple of families living in the home, and they're scraping together everything they can to pay $600, $700, $800 a month for a home that is just really substandard. Got holes in the floor, got just a lot of problems. And, a rental program would be something that where, every time someone moves out, at least they get an inspection to be able to look at it to make sure the home is safe. Cosmetically, that's not our issue, but safety for the folks living in there is our top priority.
And we'll want to look very closely at that option, because the other side of the coin is that you've got to then pay for additional officers to do more rental inspections, which means you have to charge a fee to register your home as a rental property, which then drives up the cost of the property for the renter. And so there's unintended consequences, and so you need to really think through all those very carefully.
Sabina will know all of that.
I'll prepare that for you.
Thank you.
Another issue that we have sometimes is that, you're allowed only so many animals, basically 4, either cats or dogs, in a home or on property in the city. And every now and then we will have folks who have a lot more than that, and sometimes they're not even being taken outside. So again, we're talking of a standard of living inside of a home that can degrade rapidly. I have complaints on that. We're working on one case right now where that is the issue, where it's a nice home, you wouldn't know it from the outside unless you get close. But you get close, you can smell it. And so the neighbors are complaining, and we're working on that through the courts right now, trying to take care of that.
Just so I can be clear, we have a limit of 4 animals
Yes,
in
sir.
any home,
Yes, sir.
but we'll allow 15 people to live in a group home?
Well,
They're cleaner than animals.
Really?
They shower every
I don't,
day.
All right, just checking.
Yeah.
Just checking.
They use the bathroom, not the litter box.
I think the federal government, I think the federal government tells you how many can live in that one, but they don't address dogs, right? So, here's one of a repeat offender where this is where I got voluntary access to the rear of the home. The front of the home is something that we have gone to court on a couple of different times and fined the individual. Neighbors were complaining of a smell from the back of the property and whatnot. So after talking with the homeowner, I let him know that I would like to see the back. Advised him he did not have to allow me into the back of the property, but that, I would have to get a warrant or an administrative warrant to be able to confirm it, but I would get that if that needed to happen. He led us back there, and at that time I had also asked the fire department to be part of that inspection because I wanted to see if we had a fuel load or fire hazard that was a hazard to the neighbors' homes in the event of a fire, and in this case we did. They had taken and covered most of the stuff with tarps and things from back, so neighbors couldn't see it. But we had a tremendous fuel load back there, so we were able to, like I said, we were able to get the fire department to take action as well. So we're working on it from a code enforcement end, and they're looking at it from a fire life safety end. And the sad thing about some of these homes where you have these repeat offenses is you'll have elderly parents and older children, and the children not respecting the home of the mom and dad. Bottom line with that is most of these folks are on fixed incomes. They don't have money to fix what's going on with their property. They can't. They're either that or they're not healthy enough to do it themselves. So my only option in code enforcement is to write a citation to the homeowner. And so here I'm writing a citation to someone who can't afford that citation and doesn't have the ability to clean it up. On the other hand, fire can write a citation to the offender, which was the son or the relative of that person. So we're coming at it from that direction, trying to get that property cleaned up.
But Danny, as a part of that, is there anything that's restricting us from having that conversation and giving us additional tools to write the citations to the person actually?
We have to, as code enforcement, my understanding is we have to write it to the property owner. That's who we're going after. We don't typically write a citation to a renter or anybody else. We will go to the homeowner because they're responsible for the property. But under fire life safety, that's whoever's creating the violation. And so that's why we brought the fire department in on that one to not only confirm what our fears were, but to be able to act in a different way.
And so the option with the property owner, if it isn't the occupant, is that once they receive the citation and the notice they might be going to court,
Yes.
they deal with it, whoever's the occupant,
That's
because they would end up being the person in court facing the prosecutor.
That's right. We want the property owner to be responsible for it and take care of whatever the issue is on their property. In those situations where we have relatives involved who are living on the site as well, and we've even gone as far as to get Adult Protective Services involved to try to help get the situation resolved, but 9 times out of 10 they won't file a complaint against their relative. That's again the same property, and it was the front area and the back area. This one is a 10-year file, over 10 years of file. Same person every year. And we go in, and every year we have to go after them and get them to clean it up. But you got a street of older homes that are all nice and neat, and then this, and like I said, this one has a file 2 inches thick. That's at least 10 years old of violations. Got it cleaned up about 6 months ago, and she's back in the house again, so it's just a matter of time before that one goes back. Another issue we have are junk vehicles. We have several locations in town. You're not supposed to have a junk vehicle on your property, but there are a couple of properties out there, 3 that come to mind, that have multiple cars on there. And there's an exemption in the junk vehicle ordinance in the state law that when a person says, I'm a collector, it's not a junk vehicle, I'm a collector, then he's exempt from the junk vehicle ordinance as it goes there. So, so the state law only says, only refers to it as you being a collector of a car or cars. It doesn't say how many. And so I've got one area that's got about 30 in a residential neighborhood, has got 30 collectible cars stuck on it. And so to try to get that removed, I need to be able to breach that collector law, and so I would like for us to visit that in our ordinance discussion as far as being more restrictive than state law and putting a number. Maybe you can have 1 or you can have 2, or that is, but you can't have 30, and I've got another address that has 15 on it. And the only requirement is that they screen it from public view, and they make sure all the, the grass and weeds are mowed down around them, and that they're secure so that animals aren't living in the cars and things. But there they are on residential property. So I think it's something we should address and look at it and see if there's a way to be more restrictive than the state so that we can take action and get rid of some of those. That's mine.
Have you dealt with that, Sabina?
I'm sorry?
Have you dealt with that situation?
Well, on the periphery I have, there's some ideas that we have floating around right now that we'd like to further look into and then bring back some options.
I have, and so there's a way to address it. I'm gonna need some help from Mike, though.
Well, and one of the things is zoning. I mean, you might be able to be a car collector, or even a junk
Right.
vehicle collector, but you can't do that in a residential area.
Right.
Because zoning doesn't allow that. So we
One of the many
need to address those issues and
ideas. Yeah.
talk to Sabina and Dan.
Picture of another address where we're talking about those types of cars. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Okay, so we've touched on a lot of these already. So the options that we're, or as we go into the future, into the next few months, that we'll be coming back to you with some of those policy discussions that we've touched on, several others potentially too. Some ordinance standards, those definitions in particular that we were talking about. And just to remind you of the budgetary impacts, the $6,000 that was already approved for us, and then the $25,000 additional, really mostly for tear downs. You talked a little bit about the mowing. I think we have a couple of liens worth a few $100s. Not much for the mowing, but it's really more for the larger, more substantial violations that we would use that money for.
How many tear downs can we do for 25,000?
Like roughly
Roughly between, it's an estimate of $5,000 to $7,000 per home, and depending on the size of the home, if it's large, like the one we were looking at on the first slide, it may be more than that, because
So
we're gonna
3 to
run into
5.
You're gonna run into some asbestos on some of these
Oh,
homes.
yeah.
So before any of this happens, do we need to come up with a policy though for how, because obviously, money-wise, it doesn't have to come before council, but policy-wise, in other words, this is the way we want to go at it, council. We want to put a lien on the property, or we want to have a payout, or we want to do this building or that building. That would need to come back, right,
Yeah,
Mark?
we would present a whole program to you for your consideration.
Okay.
This is a map of the reactive cases that we have out there as we've talked about so we do work largely on a reactive basis, with the exception of the past few months where we have gone to phase in more of a proactive style. And this is the beginnings of a map where we've chosen one area to begin that proactive, and we are going in a clockwise fashion, starting in that red area, I believe, and then looking at, we don't go to a new area until we've finished one area. And part of that is, as you've already talked about, just the fairness issue, that we don't spend a lot of the time with the spite complaints, but essentially have a more fair approach to, and more of a standardized approach also to.
I personally rather like the reactive and the proactive. I haven't heard any problems other than, how are we, since we moved to proactive, how has it helped? It seems like when we do reactive, we have plenty of complaints and things are working, and Mike said the police department's helping. Why are we switching to proactive? How is that helping?
I think probably the main reason, and I'll let Danny or Trina jump in on this as well, but from my perspective, it really helps us prioritize. As was mentioned, if there is kind of a spite, neighbor against neighbor type of approach where we get a lot of calls just on one particular case, then we might be missing a more egregious case that's going on in a different part of the town. And it's not that we are totally going proactive versus reactive. We're phasing in the proactive part, And we can't go out and drive through an area if we're working a lot of cases at any given moment. So that really is as we have time to go out and drive that area.
I guess that's what he's saying, is we
Well, it
have
sounds
so
like-
many we can't take care of already that are already reported. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Vogel?
Yeah, I'm getting there. I don't understand. I just see the reactive working as it is fine. I don't understand why we have to switch to proactive.
Well,
And on top of that, I don't think we're doing it now, but it can be abused in the future because someone doesn't like somebody.
when you say we're not doing it now, what do you mean?
I don't believe that we're going after people because, oh, well, I don't like them, or this is the way they treated me, but I think that could be a possibility in the
Well,
future.
a lot of your calls are neighbor on neighbor.
And I'm talking about our city staff.
Is
Like,
it-
if y'all are being proactive, and I'm not saying our staff right now is doing this, but in the future, it could become, oh, this is an opportunity for me to go get them, because
No, I wouldn't, well, I wouldn't allow that in the department, and, like I say, every person in the city to me is equal. I don't care where they live, or what their station is, and that's the way I run that department. And we respect everyone as we go out to do our job. There are a couple of different segments in the city. One, it would be somebody who may have your thought process on it as will just be reactive only. Then there's that other segment of the citizenry who says, why isn't code enforcement doing anything about this? Well, they didn't make a complaint, but they go around the city and they see all the problems that are there. We're working on a reactive basis. We're not even touching, ones that are of concern to the beautification committee and other folks who have looked at things and wanted to know why these weren't being taken care of. I had one of the beautification committee members come to me and said, why haven't you taken care of this issue over here? And I said, well, which one is it? And so I asked him if he'd filed a complaint. He filed the complaint. 10 days later, we had that taken care of, but that was on a reactive basis only. So, like I said, there's one side of the citizenry who wants you to only be reactive, and then there's the other side who wants to know why you're not doing anything, why you're not out there looking at some of these things that put a black eye on our city. So we're
Yeah.
trying to do a balance in there,
well, you just
So-
explained to me, it sounds like the reactive works, because he
It
called
does,
in
but
10
it
days.
doesn't take care of all the issues that are out there, and a lot of people don't file formal complaints.
I want Donna and Trina also to comment on, your experience, what you're seeing in the field since we've become a little bit more proactive, and the value of that you might see is the, boots on the ground. And so please come up and be prepared to make comments. And while you're doing that, the general philosophy is that, especially with us being an older city and we're not growing as far as our boundaries, and so we have a lot of older neighborhoods, and over time, if we don't be more proactive, then they're just going to deteriorate further, and the values are going to go down, and then it's going to cost us more money to be able to service the city. And then we don't have enough money coming in from taxes because the property values are going down to even provide basic services. So the whole idea is that keeping property at a certain standard, and the way that you do that is through being more proactive. If this were someplace like a Sugar Land, like almost like a brand new city, or a Frisco, it's really not going to be that of an issue. But here, because you have so many older properties, if you don't stay with it and you get behind, then it's really difficult on the city as far as losing ground in terms of property values. But in the end, it's really, just a policy decision on y'all's part about how you all want us to enforce or not enforce. And so, we would take any direction from the council.
I think what might be interested to know here, we're in this, I think we're probably on the same route here, but what we don't know and what you deal with every day is how full is that schedule? I mean, I heard 2 years ago, we've got to have another code enforcement officer. We just can't keep up with everything. So if you're doing everything you can do with 2 people on the calls that you're already receiving, I guess what you're asking is, how do we have time to go out and initiate things? So maybe the number of cases, I think you had it on one of the slides, 374, I think it said, that you had dealt with, what is that, in a year period?
Fiscal year.
In a fiscal year?
Yes.
So, 365 days in a year, and that's total, so we can.
And only 6 have gone to court. I think that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So,
So could you comment on, you know, the proactive versus the reactive?
Yeah.
And since we've gone
In
through
terms
this
of your
process
schedule.
here, how is it different?
Different wise, I think we both have compliance on both, so it's kind of hard to say, to judge which is better. When we have complaints, normally they want to be anonymous. They don't want people to know that they're being tattled on. When I go and approach someone and I tell them, you know, I'm just driving by, it makes them feel better that I'm looking at the whole street, not just singling them out. So they feel a little better. Oh, okay, you're not just singling me out. Someone's not tattling on just me. You're looking at the whole street, the whole block. I think that kind of makes things a little better.
How are you able to keep up with being both proactive and dealing with the complaints?
I do it on a day basis. On a certain day, I'll do all my complaints that have come in. Then that way I can take care of those. I'll come in and do my paperwork. The next day, I'll send emails to Danny and Trina, tell them where I'm going to be in the city, and that's the section I'm working on. Then I'll come in, do all my paperwork, and then the following day, on Wednesday, I'll go back to my Monday schedule, take care of all of the follow-ups that I need to take care of. So it's a system that I have that I feel works for me.
How large of an area are you covering when you're going out and looking for violations?
It depends on the section I'm in. If I'm over in one section that has a very nice neighborhood, it doesn't take me any time at all. There's some areas that need a little more work that it takes me a little longer to work because I'm doing multiple houses and not just one or two here or there. So there are areas in our community that really need some work, and a lot of them are older couples that the homes have been there for many, many years. That's when I call in Christian Men's Job Corps for help.
I'm
Does
sorry.
Christian Men's Job Corps have enough people to really help, and do they help?
They actually will bring in groups. There's, you know, they'll have Shriner kids sometimes come in. Sometimes they'll have a youth group come in and work for them. So they'll gather people as needed.
But there's nobody that does that on a sort of
Regular
permanent
basis.
or regular basis.
No one at this time. Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I don't know how
What
many.
it would take to get an organization somewhere created or attached to an existing organization.
The Sheriff's Department has the
Whose
community service.
The
responsibility
community
does
service
that,
people.
right, and-
I wonder if they could do
and
that someday.
They can do an
I don't know.
awful
Something
lot.
I'll
They-
certainly look into.
They put the Little League fields on a monthly cycle,
Mhm.
and they just send people out with weed eaters and whatnot. And when we had the flood a year ago, they sent people out that picked it all up. So, I mean, they're not something you're gonna be on staff, but you guys don't need it on staff, so they're certainly a pool, and they have a lot of equipment, yard equipment that they're allowed to use.
Which is not, and that's good for me to know because I know with Christian Men's Job Corps right now, we're having a problem with, I had an elderly couple that had a tree that had fallen on their vehicle. I contacted Christian Men's Job Corps. They told me they could help with this couple. Come to find out, they were having problems with trying to find someone qualified to use a chainsaw. So then they told me that they could not help with this couple. The couple ended up finding someone that came in and removed the tree from their vehicle.
Again, back when I was with Habitat for Humanity, right now Habitat is finishing up that dedicated neighborhood.
Ma Jennings? Yes,
on
ma'am.
Jennings.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
when they get done with that, they don't have other land to build on.
Mhm.
And so the future is either to find another chunk of raw land or to start working on infill housing. And when we used to be strategizing about how this might come along, our director at the time said, let's go to the city and with them identify a neighborhood. And where there are demolitions that have to happen, let's us be volunteering to make that the next Habitat home. And I think there's a good future with that.
That would be helpful for code enforcement. I mean, having that resource to come and help us out, that would be great. There's a
And
lot of
you
homes
just-
here in Kerrville that need
It's
that.
amazing how fixing up, I've seen this in other places. You fix up one property on the block, and all of a sudden, the neighbors are mowing their lawn and getting their yard waste out and taking the junk off their porch, just holding their heads up.
Right.
It just gives everybody a lift.
I couldn't agree more.
Mr. Hayes had a
Oh,
comment.
And this goes toward Councilman Local's comments about reactive and proactive. And I've heard that before, and this is good that you all are weighing in on that, whether today or in the future, about how you want to address that. So there was a mayor at one point that I worked for who basically said, if we have ordinances on the books, or if you're going to bring the ordinances to adopt and you're not going to enforce them, then I don't want to do them. So that's a philosophy as well. The other thing too is I've been part of court cases where you've cited someone to say a junked up garage in front of their home, and particularly when this goes to a jury, and they come in and they have pictures of every other home on the street with the same issue. The jury doesn't want to hear we're on a complaint basis. They want to hear, city, what are you doing to those homes too? I mean, they want a fair and equal enforcement. And so it's better at times to be able to say, yeah, we're beyond just reactive. We're now going to every person on the street. And if they've got a similar condition, a similar situation, we'll be addressing that as well. So that's, there's a balance here at times that you're faced with.
Okay, let me just chime in on that, because I'm one of those that also would prefer to be reactive, for the simple reasons that he pointed out. But to what you're talking about, don't give me codes to enforce unless we're going to actually enforce them. It's kind of like what the police department would do with speed limits. We've got speed limits. We've got people speeding all over. We can't stop them all. So we just do it when the policemen are actually stationed there. Now, we don't have citizens arrest like Gomer Pyle doing that, but we still do selectively enforce. Policeman pulls me over. One time I got pulled over and it was in traffic. And my question was, I wasn't the first guy that went by you. Why did you pull me over? Yeah. And so, and I can tell you from experience that doesn't hold up in front of a judge. Right. So, so the selectiveness thing isn't such a big deal, but, and this isn't disrespecting the current code enforcement, but the perception in the community. And when we're talking about the neighborhoods that are needing more work, as we're going to say here, their perception is going to be that they're being singled out. Because if we do a proactive approach, we're going to sweep the whole city, and a large portion of where we attach citations or fix-ups or whatever we want to call this is going to be in the neighborhoods that are feeling like they're being singled out. Mm-hmm. Whereas if it's done as a on a call-in basis or whatever it is, I'd be willing to bet that those neighborhoods are policing themselves to the level that they want to be policed. So somebody once suggested to me, and I'm not making this suggestion, but that code enforcement be handled by homeowners associations. Like when I move into a neighborhood, I'm buying into that size society agreement. And so we're less trying to make everybody in the entire city live by this standard that we're never going to come up with a standard that everybody accepts anyways. But in the smaller groups we could. Just a idea, theory, whatever to throw out there. I guess that's probably...
So few places have active homeowner associations. My neighborhood doesn't, you know.
Exactly, but the truth is, you move into your neighborhood knowing that. So some people don't want to be policing in that same way. Some of them can't. And, you know, you run into the cost. I mean, some people, it's not their priority to make sure that every grass blade isn't leaning over on the sidewalk. But you might be in a homeowners association that enforces that. So it seems to me that it'd be nice if we could get to where the overall code enforcement situation, number one, before I think we're proactive, I think you should go through the codes that we have and the ambiguities that are in the current codes, where it's left up to the code enforcement officer to have to make a judgment call. Those are bad codes, because that judgment call goes with the code enforcement officer. We shouldn't have them like that.
I don't have my staff out there interpreting the code. They go as it is written. And to address homeowners associations, I get homeowners associations that call us, asking us to do something about the problem that they have in the neighborhood. They can't get it taken care of. Realize that anything a homeowners association was gonna do, if they were gonna take it to court, they'd first have to hire themselves a lawyer, then they'd have to take it to court, then they'd have to show they're in violation of a law somewhere or an ordinance somewhere. So the only person that's gonna enforce that ordinance is the city, as far as I understand it, unless you're gonna have a lot of money spent to an attorney.
That's correct, but the codes that we have are actually covenants between the people and the city.
Not a code, but the ordinances are enforced by the city officials, not by a homeowners association. Homeowners association, I tell you, calls us all the time, asking us to do something about an issue they have in their neighborhood, and we're like, well, okay, we'll go look at it, but, you know, they only have so much authority, and
I know, they only have so much authority because that's the way it is. And I'm not suggesting we go that way, but what I'm saying is the codes that we have in general on the books are really covenants that the people have signed off on, saying, please enforce these on us. And so if we sit here as a council and make decisions on writing codes or not writing codes, we're actually breaking that covenant. And so to me, the proactive part and the reactive part was also something that's been, I gather it's been a long time being reactive. So to make that switch, without actually, I mean, that was a policy decision you're saying was made by Mr. Davis. I would think that would be something more in line with, I would prefer to see that a choice that people are making, because there are benefits to going either way, and maybe they should be discussed by the people that are being enforced.
I would say this, in general, our resources are limited, you know, not just monetarily, but with our physical resources here. We know that, and we're doing the best we can with what we have, and I think it's good, and I appreciate all of y'all who do. So the situation that we're in, I agree that let's be reactive to begin with, because we're just catching up all the time. We added resources, but we're still trying to catch up every day. And I don't want to hear citizens say, why didn't anybody take care of this complaint? I turned it in 2 weeks ago. You know, and you don't either. And that's a matter of resources. So, I mean, just logically in my mind, I don't know that we're utilizing the resources we have wisely by taking a day, just beating it out there. Maybe we come back with a violation, maybe we don't. We don't have a particular goal in mind. When Donna goes out in the car, she may find one, she may not. She's doing her job either way. But you know what I'm saying? With the resources we have, my feeling is, let's take care of the issues we know are there on a daily basis. And when we get that done, let's look at canvassing to get ahead of the schedule. You know?
Do we feel like that complaints are being neglected because we are doing?
no, we still have our response times, and
No.
we take care of
Yeah.
it, as our chart shows.
I think the important thing to note here is that we're not kind of going through the book and seeing it, checking every property and saying, okay, you did this, you did that, you did this, oh, violation. It's only the very, very severe violations that
Egregious.
we're spending some time with. The rest of them, you know, it's not, you know, that urgent, it's not that, you know, horrible of a violation. And so we don't have, as you mentioned, we don't have time to go through and nitpick, and that's not really what we want to do anyhow.
Yeah.
So it's really about those larger ones. And I think probably the thing that would be helpful for us to do, so that y'all had some more information, is, you know, we've got a couple of months under our belt with this more proactive approach, maybe longer. Bring y'all some statistics about, you know, how much does that really include, and what are the results of that? And then, you know, if you all say, you know, go back to strictly being proactive, we're completely fine with that.
Reactive.
If you look at the green, and you think they've done that in 2 or 3 months, they are not nitpicking.
No, I don't
That's
think,
a lot of
Yeah,
territory
I don't think
to.
we're not talking.
And I just wanna stand up for the person who makes his decision about where to live, not because of the aesthetics of the neighborhood, but because that's where he can afford to live. So he's sort of stuck, and if the city does not enforce the code in his neighborhood, it's like everybody's just washed their hands of him because he's a low-income person. Well, that's not fair.
I think the city
The
will enforce
code ought to
it.
be uniform, whether you're rich or poor. And to say that a neighborhood that's aging, maybe dilapidated, should be only reactive, that just strikes me as unequal. I can't figure, George.
Yeah, I didn't say that.
I just
But
want to
that's
make,
but I'm afraid that would be the result.
I think we just want to make sure that the complaints are being handled first, because that's citizen involvement. And then if we're satisfied, because I don't know, this is the first I've ever heard of this policy or anything, so I don't know, that would be helpful, Mark, to bring us some stats on that, and I'm not opposed either way. I just want to know, are we utilizing our resources best that we have, period. That's it.
Mr. Volker, did you have a comment or question?
I think it sounds like when the complaints are made, the codes are enforced. So I don't know why we can't just keep
Well,
continuing with the complaints.
it would be like waiting for somebody to complain that I ran a stop sign. No, the cop should stop me, whether there's a complaint or not. If he sees me run through a stop sign, that is behavior we can't have in a city. Too many people are put in danger. If we see a violation, we should not have to wait for somebody to complain, because there's a multitude of reasons why they may not be doing it. Unless you want to have a designated complainer. I was thinking maybe I could volunteer. Anytime you see somebody that you wish you'd get a complaint on, just call me. I'll do it.
Something else that I'll bring up at this point that
You
we
have
dealt
to.
with, that we've dealt with, that I've dealt with, is sort of a hybrid of, you've heard about Austin having neighborhood planning, and some of the issues that they get into is quite interesting. But to not have a full bore neighborhood planning program with all the funding that would have to come along with that, but to have some options that we'll come back to you with, as far as making sure, because this is a 30-year plan, right? The comprehensive plan is, we're looking out 30 years out. So the areas that are of the city, something else to think about, that are potentially going into decline, how do you define that? At what point are we potentially reaching the tipping point there? Those are all bigger questions that I think we'll want to task our, in fact, you have a list of questions you might want to add this one. At what point do we reach that in certain areas, and what do we do about them? So those are broader questions as we go into the future, and that we'll want to task also the consultants, and certainly we won't just have them out there working on their own. I'll be in close contact with them constantly to relay information and your concerns back to them as well, making sure that we get back some potential answers that we can really sink our teeth into as we go forward. That helps.
Let's go on to the next slide.
Basically some of the options that we'll also come back to you with would be the payment plans that we were talking about, the liens that we're already placing, that we have that tool, the funding for voluntary compliance that we touched on, and then the partners that we've already talked about. We definitely want to explore those further, as far as maybe even taking a lead role in those assistant programs, and defining them and fleshing them out better. Again, for the future, and again also for the consultant. So the next steps, as you know, the conference plan that is coming up. And we are asking that we continue with the proactive work so that we can come back to you with some numbers that we'll collect over the next few months. Some ordinance amendments that you'll hear us talking about, definitions being one of them. And then actively pursue the demolition, once the budget is approved, of those dangerous structures, and any others that we might identify that are the egregious ones. That's
Just
all.
a little bit of elaboration. I don't want to leave it open-ended on this proactive versus reactive, and so rather than a few months, I'll commit to you within 3 months, we'll be back to you with the information and have a discussion about it. Sharing, how is this affecting workload? What kind of violations are we seeing on the 2 different approaches? What sort of complaints have we received on the 2 different approaches? That sort of thing.
Yeah, good.
So at this point, the next slide, I think, is questions and comments beyond what has already been discussed. I, for one, have really appreciated this. This is what we don't really get a lot of time to do a deep dive into some of these subjects. And so this is helpful for the staff to understand where you're coming from and your concerns, so that as we look at how we carry those out, we have a better understanding. So this has been helpful for us to get that level of feedback. So with that, Mayor, we take any additional questions that you might have.
Yeah, we're not prepared probably to get into it at all today, but you and I have had a discussion, maybe others have as well. But, on this plan about the demolition and liens on properties, or how to recoup that money from the property owner, when it does come before us, I do want to understand why we're not giving some property owner a benefit that another property owner may have to pay for himself or herself. How are we determining that if we go in and spend this money, it's not increasing the value of that property owner's property and for free? So that'll be a question from the community that we'll want to be sure we address and everybody understands before we go there.
How
Right.
to make that fair.
Right.
So as you commented earlier, Mayor, it's budgeted, it's less than 50,000, are you going to be coming back to us? The answer is yes. So, because I think this is more of a policy and a program that I
Right.
think that the council needs to really support, or us do something different. And so when we come back at the 3-month mark with additional stats on proactive versus reactive, we'll probably come back with a proposal on how we will plan to spend that $30,000. And do we clean it up and then file a lien? Do we allow payout, and if they don't pay out, file the lien? Just different options for you all to consider, and kind of best practices about some of those things.
Okay.
I'd just like to make one more comment that I think is kind of a gorilla in the room whenever you're bringing up something like this. When I used to do those Habitat home inspections and see some of the rental property in this town, people were paying hundreds of dollars a month to live in a house that had holes in the floor. The landlord was a very prominent person in this town. That's the kind of fairness that I think we have to be really, really strict about. No matter how prominent you are. You may not be a slumlord in Kerrville, because we're not going to have any slumlords, because we're not going to have any citizens of Kerrville victimized. These were people that they had a language difficulty, they were scared to complain, and they were just living with it. They just put a rug over it and a little end table and warned visitors, don't walk near there. Heavens to Betsy. In a town this prosperous, it's intolerable.
Legally, it's sticky, as we've talked about.
But
It is a problem.
But it means that people like us are gonna get the blowback from people that own these properties and don't wanna put any money in them, but wanna collect the rents. And we just have to be prepared to say, no, that's not fair, it's not gonna happen.
Any other questions or comments anywhere?
I just had one comment, and it's more of a clarification, because I felt like I was misunderstood. When I was talking about interpreting the codes, I wasn't meaning that as a derogatory statement to the code enforcement. It was actually in support, because the solid waste is one that I believe was written poorly in a way that forces you to, it has ambiguous words in it that makes you have to interpret. What I've heard about the home occupancy rewrite that's going on right now, I mean, a discussion was being had about what could be reasonably expected, whatever. reasonably expected. That puts interpretation on you. Those are what I was talking about, and those, I think, need to be cleaned up, eliminated until they can be, so that you're not in a position where you have to write a policy to back up the code. That's really what I was meaning.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
That's what P and Z, I think, is working on now.
Yeah.
Home occupation, you know,
Yeah.
not occupancy, yeah. Anything else? I think it's been real helpful to us too, staff. I've learned something today, and hopefully we've all learned something today, and we've all got our work cut out for us. Is there anything else by anyone out here? Any questions? No? If not, are we ready to adjourn at 11:40, and we will reassemble at 1 o'clock?